have 6 o'clock. So will the secretary please call the roll?
Ms. Como?
Here.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Here.
Mr. Jimenez?
Here.
Ms. Leahy?
Here.
Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee?
I have not heard that he won't be attending, so he may join us in a moment.
Okay. Mr. Meyer? Mr. Meyer? I see you saying here, but we can't hear you. Mr. Korberg?
Here.
Mr. Spivey?
Here.
Mr. Turner?
I have also not heard that he wouldn't be attending.
Okay, I'll watch.
So a quorum of the Board of Education is present, so the regularly scheduled meeting of July 20th, 2020 is in order. We will now have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So tonight's agenda has previously been distributed to the board. I'd entertain a motion at this time and a second to approve the agenda, unless
Make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, a motion has been made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Korberg to approve the agenda as submitted. We will have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
And I still don't see Mr. Lee. Mr. Meyer? Okay, I see you. We still can't hear you. I see you. Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Okay, so are there any consent agenda announcements? No?
Well, then I make a motion to approve the items on the superintendent's consent agenda as presented.
Second.
So the consent agenda is a mechanism used by the board to deal with routine business that must come before the body. Are there any items the members want to remove from the consent agenda? So with a motion made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Turner, the items on the superintendent's consent agenda are approved as presented. We will have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Meyer? Who now appears frozen?
Yeah.
Mr. Meyer? Okay, we'll move on.
Might have to go out and come back in.
Yeah. Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Aye. So we'll now move to the board consent agenda.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Ms. Como to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented. We will have another roll call vote, please.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Meyer? Mr. Meyer?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Aye. Okay, so we're going to move down to our action items for the night, and we'll begin with the Cooley Region Virtual Academy resolution.
I make a motion to approve the resolution to agree to establish and maintain on a cooperative basis a virtual learning program pursuant to section 66.0, .0301 to the Wisconsin statutes.
Second.
A motion has been made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Turner to approve the resolution to agree to establish and maintain on a cooperative basis a virtual learning program pursuant to section 66.0301 of the Wisconsin statutes. Discussion.
I can offer up just a little bit of context. This is the collaborative that we've been putting together with Holmen, Onalaska, West Salem, and Bangor school districts to create an online virtual option for students in this time. The intent is to use the resources in our own school districts, but to create a similar program so that students across our region have a high quality virtual option as opposed to them seeking opportunities elsewhere at this time. We imagine that this option will continue on even after this global pandemic has tapered. And so it'll be a nice option for parents and students in our communities to access virtual learning as it becomes necessary in their lives.
Okay. Any questions from board members or comments? Okay, then we are going to have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Meyer? Mr. Meyer? Oh, and I think he might be frozen again. Okay. Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the first reading for our bylaw on speaker limitations at public, speaker limitations at public meetings.
Make a motion to grant first reading approval to bylaws, speaker limitations at public meetings.
Aye.
We need a
Is
second.
there a second, Mr. Turner?
Second, pardon, yeah.
No problem. No problem. All right, so a motion has been made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Turner to grant first reading approval to bylaws, speaker limitations at public meetings. So we'll open it up for discussion. This was an information item at last Monday night's meeting. And we had some discussion then. So this is the same language that was brought forward before. But any recommend?
I'll go ahead. As I spoke last week, I am comfortable with the new language. I'd rather know. I mean, we don't probably necessarily need to know a person's address, although you probably can find it online. It'll take you maybe a 2-minute search to do it. But I would like to know if I think that information was given to us, so we would know if that person is a constituent in our district or not. And there may be some issues down the line that we want to know that information. And if we don't have that information, we can't, make a decision on certain things. But I'd say if we get city, town, or village of residents, that's not going to give us anything. Why are we even asking for that? Because it's not really going to pinpoint anything. I guess either knowledge of whether they're a constituent of our district or what school district they are a constituent of might be another alternative. I mean, I don't think it gives anybody makes it so that nobody would want to speak. I mean, we aren't curbing people from not in our district to not speak. So I guess I just think that information is something that would be nice to know.
So, Mr. Corber, can you speak to what amended suggestion that you're making specifically?
Oh, maybe something like the speaker shall specify name, school district they reside in, and the agenda item for discussion. So that would replace both those city, town, or village of residence, school district that they reside in. So I guess I'd offer that up for an amendment.
The only thing that I can just, because if we have people who opt in, like come from West Salem or Onalaska, but their children go to the La Crosse School District, that would be, just one of those kind of oddball places where that school district residence doesn't necessarily mean as much. Do you know what I mean? Like the hard part is they can't vote on a lot of things that are happening within our school district, but they're opting in because our school district has so many choices and wonderful educators.
Yeah, I thought of that, but I mean, I would hope they would talk about that in their
Right.
remarks. But again, going back to the point, it would be nice to know if they do reside in the school district of La Crosse, so we know if they are a constituent of ours or not.
I agree.
If I may, I've thought about this a little bit over the weekend, just thinking about my previous experiences in other school districts. I guess I haven't encountered a reason yet to follow up with a constituent who has spoken at a school board meeting, except for when they've explicitly asked for that, and then we've gotten contact information thereafter. I have seen circumstances where it was, of minor interest to know if they were in the school district or not. And granted, I've been in smaller school districts historically, so you generally know if they live in your community or not. But I guess I've never found a need to follow up with anyone with their physical address. And even in terms of whether or not they were a resident of our school district, it was, maybe once or twice of importance if they were speaking on a referendum issue, whether or not they would actually vote as opposed to being a taxpayer in our district. I have seen a number of people express fear, though, over the years about speaking because they did have to give their address. And most recently at one of our school board meetings here, where that need to identify where they live caused them some hesitance and may have stifled some desire to speak publicly. And I'm a little nervous about other groups that have been historically marginalized that may have encountered, other situations where their speech was limited by the power dynamics at play. And so in my general opinion, I prefer conditions that lead to more open speech and discourse, and the more specificity we have in terms of where you live, the greater stifling that would have. And so my personal preference, as I think about it, would be to put as few restrictions as possible, as few requirements as possible on speakers, because I feel like the speech we would benefit from more than the reporting of district or address or township. But that's just, as I thought about it this weekend, what my thoughts are.
I do want to follow up on one point. I know Mr. Jimenez asked last week about still requiring a street address, not asking a speaker to provide that information before they spoke, but asking at the time of registering, and that would make that a public record. And so I would be, I just as a board member, I'm reluctant to require them to provide that if they do not want to require that street address. But I share that now because if there's a consensus that the board would want to adopt Mr. Korberg's amendment, so we would ask for that information. I would suggest the board consider that question be asked at the time they register and not necessarily be asked before they speak.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So I kind of have similar thoughts as Brad on it, but I understand of not requiring that. But kind of I guess maybe, I mean, what if, I mean, if somebody really wanted to speak and not give their address and stuff, I mean, this sounds really wild, but what if you get people talking using false names and stuff like that? That gets a little, there's a lot of people that might possibly do that if they're really interested. But I do believe we have to feel like everybody's influencers. So we live in a very small region, despite people might think it's bigger. It's pretty small communities, and a lot of interactions between Alaska, Holman, West Salem, people crisscrossing. They have friends and families in both of those communities. And if we had somebody in West Salem that wanted to speak in front of our board, and for whatever reason we said no because they didn't give their address or whatnot, you know, they could be an influencer in a negative way. If we go to a referendum, they could, quite frankly, be a counter protester, saying and convincing their friends and families to vote against those referendums. So I think we almost have to view everybody as a potential. So I guess I would be, I guess I would probably open it up to just, does the address really matter at the end of the day? We can wade through what they're saying. Even though I would prefer the address, I would prefer the community they live in. I'm just not sure it makes 100% of a difference in what they're saying. Because I mean, if it's a bunch of, you know, nonsense or whatnot, we can wade through that and figure that out.
So just be clear, in my amendment, I am not asking for an address.
Any other questions or comments?
I would second Brad's request and add in Lori's kind of tweak to it in terms of like asking folks when they register if they live in the La Crosse school district or what school district do they live in. And then if we do that, would we get rid of, gotta go back to it, the city, town, or village that's also in number 2 as well?
That was my original thought, that it would just be replaced with current school district you reside in, or the speaker resides in.
Okay.
In both number 1 point and the number 2 point.
But what Lori was saying, so in the first point, when they register with now Laura, they would specify what school district they live in, but when they come before the board.
Oh, I see what you mean, yeah.
So then we would strike that whole thing out.
I mean, I think if we asked for it the first time, I guess that would be enough. They wouldn't have to say it in front of the, I mean, it's one or the other. If you see it, it's public information, so. So then in your point, the number 2 would just say the speaker shall specify name and the topic for discussion.
I concur with that.
I like that compromise.
Okay. So we'll ask for that information, but that will be provided to Laura at the time of registration, but not before they have to speak publicly.
I'm fine with that.
All right, then,
Does someone have to second Brad's motion or?
so yeah, let's have a second for that amendment to
Second.
thank you. Okay.
Sorry.
All right, so now we'll have a roll call vote for the first reading of our bylaw on speaker limitations with the amended language.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez?
No.
You said no, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Meyer?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. All right, the next item we have on the agenda is the first reading for our bylaw on news media services at public meetings.
Make a motion to grant first reading approval to bylaws, news media services at public meetings.
Second it.
So a motion has been made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Korberg to grant first reading approval to bylaws, news media services at public meetings. So folks, this was another one of our board policies. It just hadn't been updated in quite some time. And so Laura and I got to talking about, do we have a media table? Do we use a media table? Plus, all the documents that we now have are online via board docs. And so this is just a cleaning up of that policy. Laura, is there anything that you want to add to the discussion on that?
Yep, and another piece that we're adding in is looping in Nick Marcoux, our communications specialist with the district or for the district, as he is going to play a vital role in alerting the news media, just to ensure that all media are privy to the board information as it comes available.
Any other discussion or questions or comments about the changes to that bylaw?
Yeah, I'm fine with this. That was you answered my question as to whether anybody actually shows up and looks for, or a person from the media actually shows up and looks for a table with documents. So I'm fine with this arrangement as long as we're working with the media so they know where they can access the information and that we're following the guidelines and the time when things have to be posted and things like that.
All right, so we'll have a roll call vote on that.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Meyer?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. All right, next item, we have our first reading of GC5 board committees.
Make a motion to grant first reading approval to GC5 board committees.
Second.
A motion has been made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Korber to grant first reading approval to GC5 board committees. So board members, you'll recall that this is one of those policies that we update anytime we do add an ad hoc committee. It is updated annually as well. So any ad hoc committee that we create, even if its charge terminates before the time that we review it annually, it gets stricken at that time. So board members will see that we have just changed the language so that it's consistent with our policy on committee creation. We've added the charge, the membership for the Fund 80 Ad Hoc Committee that was previously formed, and removing the other committees that are that are not currently charged. Any questions or comments about this policy?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm trying to understand why adding in ad hoc committees into the policy. I'm just thinking about moving to ad hoc. Let's assume in January we decide another ad hoc committee is needed. Would that require then a change in policy again, in a first reading and a second reading? I think it makes sense to list the board committees when they're permanent or standing committees. I just don't know that it makes sense to list ad hoc committees just because of that.
Sure. So I can speak to that. And if Ms. Steigerwald or Dr. Harsey want to speak to it as well. This came up at the discussion at Wisdom Sharing last fall. So under policy governance, as all of us know, any committees are ad hoc by their very nature. And I get your point, Mr. Jimenez, about having to update anytime there may be changes to that policy. The reason that Randy and Linda advocated for handling that policy in that way actually had more to do with the trouble on the other end when the policy is not annually updated, which is to say that if you form an ad hoc committee and there is no regularly, like, all meetings should terminate within a year, period. And there certainly have been cautionary tales that were shared about committees where this policy was not annually updated, that continued beyond their charge in ways that were deleterious. That said, there is a need then to make sure that we're officially recording the creation of any committee, even though, to your point, Mr. Jimenez, all committees are ad hoc, to make sure that they're operating within the charge that we give them. I don't know if that answered your question, but that was the context for
Sure.
why they recommended doing the policy in that way.
Okay. And I see their point. I'm just thinking that, so if I remember correctly, you have the power as the board president to create an ad hoc committee. But given this scenario, I'm just thinking which actually gives authority? Your authority given the policy, or us having to have a first and second reading to add the ad hoc committee to the policy? And that's where I guess I have some confusion.
Yeah.
And because, again, if we were to do something mid-year, does that mean we have to have a first and second reading of the policy to add the ad hoc committee that the board president has already authorized?
No, it's a great question, and I see your point. So just like with the Fund 80 Ad Hoc Committee, we were able to go ahead and form it. We were able to go ahead and charge it, and it was able to actually already complete its task at this point. So we don't have to hold up any committees in order to update the policy. But once a committee has been created, at the next board meeting, we should have our policy stipulate first and second reading. So therefore, at the next meeting following the creation of the ad hoc committee, we'd have the first reading, the second reading. But if the question is, does that not grant authority to the committee until we update the policy? No. If the president or if the board grants approval for the formation of a committee, it can continue with its work in absence of updating this policy. I think about this policy like tonight as a paper, like a housekeeping kind of thing. And any other questions or comments about the changes to the this policy on committee formation? We'll have a roll call vote then.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez,
Aye.
Ms. Leahy,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Mr. Korberg,
Aye.
Mr. Spivey,
Aye.
Mr. Turner,
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll.
Aye. All right, the next item we have on the agenda is the second and final reading for our bylaw on board policies.
I'd like to make a motion to grant second and final reading approval for the policy approval to bylaws board meetings.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Ms. Como to grant second and final reading approval for policy approval to bylaws board meetings. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como,
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez,
Aye.
Ms. Leahy,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Mr. Korberg,
Aye.
Mr. Spivey,
Aye.
Mr. Turner,
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll.
Aye. Next, we have the second and final reading for OE3, treatment of community stakeholders.
Make a motion to grant second and final reading approval to OE3, treatment of community stakeholders.
Second.
Second.
A motion has been made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Korberg to grant second and final reading approval to OE3, treatment of community stakeholders. Any final discussion? Have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como,
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez,
Aye.
Ms. Leahy,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Mr. Korberg,
Aye.
Mr. Spivey,
Aye.
Mr. Turner,
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll.
Aye. Next, we have our second and final reading to OE4, personnel administration.
And make a motion to grant second and final reading approval to OE4, personnel administration.
Second.
A motion has been made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Korberg to grant second and final reading approval to OE4, personnel administration. Is there any final discussion on this change? Then we will have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como,
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez,
Aye.
Ms. Leahy,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
thank you. Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Mr. Korberg,
Aye.
Mr. Spivey,
Aye.
Mr. Turner,
I actually saw he just,
did he drop off? Okay.
I think he did.
Oh, here. Let me see what Juan just typed. Is that Juan? Is that your vote or is that Mr. Turner's vote?
That would be Juan's vote.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
For the next policy.
For the next one, yep. Okay, so Mr. Turner's not there. Okay, and Dr. Cooper Stoll.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, next we have second and final reading for OE11, instructional program.
Make a motion to grant second and final reading approval to OE11, instructional program.
Second.
A motion has been made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Korberg to grant second and final reading approval to OE11 instructional program. Is there any final discussion? And we'll have
I think the only thing that I would say with that was just, I know that we had talked around the culturally responsive and culturally competent. And I'm wondering if we can figure out how to just keep them both in, because I think while culturally competent tends to be the general lingo, I suppose, the school district uses culturally responsive. And so I think if we can either put them both in there or, you know, that's just my thought, so.
Okay, do you want to make an amendment then?
Yes. I would like to make an amendment to say culturally responsive and culturally competent.
Any discussion or comments, questions?
Shondell, what did you say that the school district currently uses?
Culturally responsive.
Just that. Okay.
Okay, so we will have a roll call vote on the second and final reading with that amended change, unless there's opposition.
Do we need a motion and a second to make that amendment?
Yeah, we need, I'm sorry, thanks, Laura. We need a
Yep.
second. Mr.
It's-
Spivey.
So-
I'll second it.
Okay.
We have a roll call vote, please.
So is the roll call vote for the amendment or for just the amendment, and then we do the whole policy, right?
Well, I was including them together. I don't hear any
Oh.
opposition from the board
Gotcha.
about not doing that. So
I'm
gonna
fine
say-
with that if that's fine.
Okay.
I think we should, Mr. Jimenez says he is back. So do we want to double check that he is up to speed on this amendment?
My assumption is the amendment is to return the language back to culturally responsive instead of culturally competent. Is that correct?
Both culturally responsive and culturally competent.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Ms.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then we have a motion and a second. So Ms. Como,
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez,
Aye.
Ms. Leahy,
Aye.
Mr. Lee. Oh, is he back on or not? No. Okay, sorry. Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Mr. Korberg,
Aye.
Mr. Spivey,
Aye.
Mr. Turner is not back on either, is he? Nope. Okay. Dr. Cooper Stoll.
Aye. All right. Next, we have second and final reading for R1 mega results.
I make a motion to grant second and final reading approval to R1 mega results.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Ms. Como to grant second and final reading approval to R1 mega results. Is there any final discussion? Then we will be, then we'll have a, sorry, I was reading Mr. Lee's comment. We'll have a roll call vote, please.
Ms. Como,
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez,
Aye.
Ms. Leahy,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Mr. Korberg,
Aye.
Mr. Spivey,
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll.
Aye. So next we have our second and final reading for R2 academic performance.
I make a motion to grant second and final approval or reading approval to R2 academic performance.
Second.
A motion has been made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Korberg to grant second and final reading approval to R2 academic performance. Is there any final discussion on this one? Then we will have a roll call.
Ms. Como,
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez,
Aye.
Ms. Leahy,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Mr. Korberg,
Aye.
Mr. Spivey,
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll.
Aye. All right, the last item we have on for action tonight is the policy approval, second and final reading for R3, Involved Citizenship.
I make a motion to grant second and final reading approval to R3 Involved Citizenship.
Second.
A motion has been made by Ms. Como and seconded by Mr. Korberg to grant second and final reading approval to R3 Involved Citizenship. Is there any final discussion? Then we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como,
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez,
Aye.
Ms. Leahy,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Mr. Korberg,
Aye.
Mr. Spivey,
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. All right. Information items. I just want to thank the board. We've moved through a lot of, policy changes in the last several meetings, and I thank you for just being so thoughtful about them and offering some great suggestions. I'm very pleased with the changes that we've. Okay, so we have 2 items on our information this evening. The first is the school resource officer program review charge. So the Fund 80 ad hoc committee met last Tuesday evening and completed their charge, which was to take the questions that school board members have and to synthesize them. We were able to organize those thematically thanks to Dr. Engel, who helped with that process, and finalize the list of stakeholders. So the next thing that would happen in the process is that the board would then vote on this charge to actually seek answers to the questions that school board members have. And so that is what you have before you tonight, is the draft of that charge. So questions, comments about the draft charge. And I'm sure Dr. Engel will be happy to answer. I'm speaking for you, Dr. Engel, but answer questions that you might have about that as well.
The only question I have would be just to clarify stipulation 7. So there would, according to this, there would be potential updates at every board meeting from now until we have a final report from Dr. Engel. Would that be correct? Even if it's just a report back that we haven't met yet, or there was no movement at this point.
That is correct. At least monthly, I would imagine you'd want an update. So, or even biweekly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jimenez. All right, if there's no questions or discussions, then what will happen next is that this will just be on our next board meeting agenda as an action item.
Thank you for the hard work in getting to this point.
Well, and special thanks to the folks who stepped up to be on the Fund 80 ad hoc committee. Appreciate your time and your efforts. And thanks to the board members as well who submitted questions as we expected. There was a lot of overlap between some of those. And so, yeah, so thanks to all of you. All right, the next item that we have for information is the reopening plans for the 2020-2021 school year. I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Engel.
So we've been continuing to work with the county on reopening plans. The initial document we put out last Monday was relatively general, and we're continuing to develop detailed plans in collaboration with the county. I would like to say, first and foremost, that if it isn't safe to open, and we're working closely with the county on that, then we will not reopen our school buildings. Our first concern is the safety of our students and our staff. And so we want to make sure that the county weighs in on that public health decision so that we can do what's appropriate for schools. So that is where the decision to open will truly come from, is from our county folks. If it's not safe, if the conditions in the county don't warrant it, then we're not going to reopen our school buildings. And so that is the first and foremost thing that we're putting together. At the same time, at some point, our school buildings will reopen. And whether that is on September 1st, or at second quarter, or second semester, or God forbid, next school year, we need to be ready for that eventuality. And we need to have plans and processes in place so that we can properly take care of students and staff when that happens. And so we are continuing to develop detailed reopening plans in order to be prepared for when it's safe to do so. We're continuing to monitor the conditions along with the county to see where things are at. The better off things are in the county, the more likely it is that we are to reopen. We know that in person we provide a high quality education for students, and that is of course our goal. At the same time, we want to be realistic about that possibility. We're continuing to work with the county to develop those plans. We have another meeting this Thursday, and depending on the conditions in the county, things may have changed. We know that infection rates are still high relative to other parts of the state and to the country, and we need to be responsive to that. And so while I think, we put out some hope last Monday, we're also realistic in knowing that if things change, we won't be opening face-to-face. There are some families who are nervous about coming in and out of school, and for that reason, we have the Cooley Reach and Virtual Academy as an excellent online option taught by our teachers here in the county. So I think there's a great virtual option for folks that are nervous about school reopening, have concerns about pre-existing conditions. And so I think it's good to let folks know that we have a good solid option for folks that need that, and we're excited to develop that and bring that to our community. So our plans could be changing at any time. Right now we're in discussions about how we create a certain level of consistency. Right now the county is adjusting their plans on a biweekly basis. For the benefit of our families, we want to provide as much in-person schooling as possible. We also know that, we can't make changes overnight and be successful the next day. So it may take a couple of days or maybe even a couple of weeks to change our plans significantly from online to in-person. We have to rearrange transportation, food service, instructional models. Parents need to accommodate for childcare needs. There's lots of factors that go into reopening or closing schools and being sensitive to the needs of our community. We are looking at adjusting our professional development time for staff before the school year opens. As Dr. Harsey has quoted to me once or twice, you don't have to recover from a good start. And so we want to invest in our teachers before the school year starts, give them all the professional development time they need to be able to be prepared for online instruction, blended instruction, and the safety precautions necessary for when we come back to face-to-face. So that's big on our minds as well. And then depending on how things happen in the county, between now and the school year starting, there may be a good opportunity to put out another survey for our staff and our students to get a better sense of what their comfort level is with our options and at different points. And I think that will be useful information for us to respond to and for the school board as well, to understand what's going on in our community, how people are approaching this information, and allow us to make the best possible decisions. So I would say we have a lot more to learn this week, I think, in particular. We're slowly getting down to crunch time, so to speak. But just know that we're ever flexible and adaptable and have to be so throughout this whole pandemic.
So are you opening it up for questions or comments? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I have a few based on conversations that I've had this week with teachers and staff and families in the community. And I think you've touched on each one of these points just a little bit in the information you provided. My first question to you is this. So right now, unless we hear differently from the health department, we are making a plan for there to be some form of in-person schooling. At the same time, we are offering the virtual academy. For families who are able to do virtual learning, and that with an understanding that certainly may not work for every family, but also knowing that that would reduce the number of in-person students who, for various reasons, have various needs where they might need in-person schooling. Should we be encouraging folks to do the virtual academy if they are able to do that?
I guess we wanted to make sure that we provided a good option, for every family's needs. And I guess I hesitate to make decisions for families, but I would say that, if it works for you in your situation, the virtual academy is an excellent opportunity. And the more students that are enrolled in the virtual option, the fewer there will be present in our classrooms, which will alleviate some of the burdens in terms of social distancing. So I'd say there is a symbiotic effect there that would benefit face-to-face. So without, saying you should, I think that it is a great option, which will also have a corresponding benefit in our face-to-face situation.
So the second piece to that, then, Dr. Engel, is, and I think Dr. Lahecki answered this question when I posed it last Monday. Let's say that conditions are such that we begin with some form of in-person schooling. There's still the chance that we then have to go online as the situation changes in the community. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the student, if that happens, the students who are doing in-person learning, you don't transition to the virtual academy. That is something that's separate. So I just want to make sure for families that are listening in that the professional development that you're talking about is professional development that will help provide supports for teachers to be able to go online if we have some form of in-person learning, and B, then have to shut that down and go online. Is the bulk of that professional development happening in August around supports, trainings, and so on around moving things online well?
Yes. So there'll be almost two tracks. So one track will be for teachers that anticipate teaching face-to-face when the opportunity presents itself. And so for those folks, we know that some of our instruction will be online throughout this whole period of time, because we'll have students that are in and out of school due to exposures to coronavirus or various quarantines. And so our teachers will need to have the resources and skills to be able to teach in both an online and in-person format, so that blended format. And that may mean we start online, and they're going to need to know how to teach from the get-go online. And it also may mean that we come back in, September, but have to go back into online in October. So that'll be one track of our professional development. We'll be providing teachers with the skills to manage that blended environment. We hope to, early on in August, identify the teachers that will be teaching in the virtual school, the Cooley Region Virtual Academy. And for those individuals, the professional development that we know of at that time will revolve around how to teach in that solely online environment. And so we'll almost have two tracks of professional development, one for those hoping to return to the traditional model, but a blended one, and those that we know are going to be teaching in an entirely virtual format.
And finally, just a comment. I appreciate your willingness to support additional data collection as we move into August. If I understand correctly, we've had 2 data points thus far that have suggested about, is it over 60% of families in our community have indicated support for a return to in-person schooling. But we also understand that, as you point out, situation changes. Almost on a day-by-day basis. So as board members, having more data, especially as we get closer to the start of school, and knowing whether or not families in our community checking in, taking the pulse of where they stand at that time will be very important. So I just appreciate your willingness to provide some of those additional data points for us.
And I would say the reason we haven't had out something sooner is I don't feel like we've provided enough details yet for families to make a really informed choice. I think we're hopeful that this week or next we'll be able to get out some more detailed plans about what a return to face-to-face will look like, because it will not look like, you know, what happened in February of last year. It's going to be drastically different to account for COVID-19. And so we want to make sure that we get good information to parents so they can make an informed decision on virtual versus in-person or the blended environment. And we may have to extend the window for enrollment in the virtual academy so that our parents have that information. But at this point, a survey wouldn't provide the right data. And so we're hopeful that we can get some good details out to parents, the ones that they need to really make an informed choice on a survey or as it relates to the virtual academy.
So while details are still working out as far as what in-person learning may look like, if I'm understanding you correctly, it is fair to say that whatever that may look like, it will not look like a return to schooling as usual for families who may be, we don't know yet what that will look like, but we know enough to know it won't look like it did before, and families should know that. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Questions and comments from other board members?
I have a question. Brenda, did you have a question first? You can go ahead. Okay. I just had a question if there was some reason why we couldn't go to face-to-face and a family opted to, and if it was just online, like I could see some families actually just not want to do online and not want to do virtual and maybe just wait a year and enter high school as a freshman, you know, when they should be a sophomore, or vice versa. I'm curious how that would be handled with those situations. Whereas I've actually, I don't hear tons of stuff about school board related issues, but I think the information that was put out was so general last week that it caused, I actually got a lot of people talk to me about that and said it was so, it confused people and it created a heightened sense of anxiety. And people are talking to me, what are the options? Is Aquinas an option? Are other schools an option? Because they're so stressed out about, as everybody is, obviously, about the return to fall. So I guess, you know, how is that situation be handled if I don't want to send my son to online? Because unless it's drastically changed, I don't think I beg that what happened in the spring, obviously it was a very rushed situation, but my son and daughter, I'm not quite sure the learning took place. They got their passing grades, but I'm not 100% sure the actual learning took place. And I know my son is a face-to-face kid. Put him in a virtual environment and he would probably go bonkers. It would be a detriment to him. And I think it might be detrimental to other kids as well. And parents might opt to find a private school or move out of the region actually to a safer location where they can go to face, unless there was a plan in place for the kids that just, it doesn't fit them. Online, virtual doesn't fit them. We can't do face-to-face. Would they just be able to not go to school and then when face-to-face started up, go to school again and then be allowed the opportunity to catch up?
There are compulsory attendance laws on the books with the state of Wisconsin. You know, at the same time, I know that we're working with the DPI to see what that means under these circumstances. We do know that some families were going to choose a virtual option just because they didn't want the uncertainty of, you know, what face-to-face would look like, which is why we put together the Cooley Region Virtual Academy. You know, as a part of the meetings that we've been with, Aquinas, you know, has been a part of those meetings, as well as Luther and many other private schools. So I think we're all dealing with the same data, the same conversations with the county. I definitely respect the fact that the experience many families and students had online last spring was not what they wanted it to be. Depending on what school district you were in, there were varying degrees of satisfaction, or depending on your students' learning needs, there were varying degrees of satisfaction or even learning occurring. And I think that is, one of the reasons why we're trying to get back face-to-face is we know that for a large proportion of our students, they did not learn online. At the same time, we have to follow the county's recommendations in terms of safety. If we're not allowed to come back and reopen our school buildings, we can't reopen our school buildings. And I know that will be very difficult for many of our students. And so we're taking the lessons that we learned from the spring and applying those to the fall. And so the quality of the education, I anticipate, will be much greater. The level of supports will be much different. And so I hope that for those families that are nervous about the start this fall, we've learned some valuable lessons and we'll be applying them in this upcoming school year.
So another question on that for county. The state superintendent could overrule. I mean, the counties are just guidelines. If maybe I'm wrong, I could be wrong on this, but the state superintendent could overrule that, or maybe even the governor.
The state superintendent does not.
Is that correct or not?
No, I don't think so. The state superintendent does not have much authority as it relates to opening and closing schools. The governor doesn't have much authority either. Secretary of State designee Andrea Palm does have the authority to close schools across the state as a whole, but does not have any fine-tuned powers in that regard. The authority really rests with the counties after the latest Supreme Court decision, and that's being deliberated even right now after Dane County put out some public health orders. So the county could order us closed. At this point, it's been recommendations. There have not been official orders.
And then one last thing regarding, this is kind of an equity thing. I think I've already heard a couple of stories of people opening their own tutoring shops in bigger spaces for if we have to go online, if people have to go online, that instead of kids staying at home when their parents are working, they can go and actually get tutored as long as it's, socially distanced tutoring essentially. And so I would actually do that. I would pay the money to have tutoring done for my son and daughter. Luckily, I can afford to have that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people within our district that can't actually afford that. And so I think if there's this little black market economy going on with tutoring happening, and a family that couldn't afford it but wanted to send their son or daughter to a tutor, I don't know if this is something a public education foundation could pay for, or obviously the funds are tight, but I think it should be something to explore to how we could support, because it's going to happen. It's just going to go on steroids. Tutoring's always been going on. It's just going to go on steroids, and a lot more people are going to be tutored. And unfortunately, the kids whose parents can't afford it or just don't even know about the tutoring options out there will be left behind again. So I think that should be something that is discussed. I'm done.
That is something that weighs very heavily on us as we talk about various options for reopening. We know that during this closure, while all students across the state, the nation, even the globe were closed, it's hard to think of there wasn't lost learning because nobody learned anything through this period of time, so to speak. At the same time, we know that disadvantaged groups that have more trouble accessing education traditionally, those gaps have been exacerbated by this closure. For families that are able to provide opportunities for their students during this closure, they're still, able to learn in new ways. And for families that have not been able to provide similar opportunities, those gaps are growing. And so that is something that we think about a lot. How do we achieve equity, disproportionately helping those that need it most as we return? And there's lots of different ideas about how that could look, whether it is providing specialized services for students that need it most. Maybe we use our teaching staff in novel ways. Maybe we provide resources that go straight to places in the community to help students that need it most. And so that is something that really weighs on us as we balance, the educational needs of our students and safety concerns.
Ms. Leahy, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, you may have addressed this last week and I missed it, but how will you identify the teachers for the virtual academy?
So we've already had some teachers reach out to us expressing interest for a variety of reasons. Some teachers really enjoyed teaching online and thought they did it really well. Others have reached out to us who have health concerns and are nervous about returning in person. Our first priority would be to work with teachers who have health concerns and to provide them an option that would keep them safe during this time.
That's fantastic. That was something that really weighed on me after last week's meeting, and I'm very concerned about our staff, especially that have health concerns. So I'm glad that that opportunity is there. And it sounds like with the professional development that you're creating, that they will be supported and will be up to speed and will be able to provide that excellent education that our students want. I'm also happy to hear you say that the safety of our students and our staff is what's most important, and that we have a plan, but it may change if it doesn't feel like our schools are going to be safe. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
I have a kind of a follow-up to that. What kind of input are teachers currently having or will have in the plan? I know it was general and more top administrator kind of ideas. I think more so in the last, in the presentation. But what kind of involvement will our teachers and staff have?
We've been involving staff in focus groups at the elementary and secondary level throughout. Depending on which building a teacher was in, we may or may not have just hired an administrator for them, so they may or may not have been as involved from the start. So that was a factor early on. At this point, as we develop the detailed plans, our teachers are heavily involved through staff meetings or focus groups or building leadership teams and helping iron out those details and figure out what's going on. Their voice is crucial in understanding how things will actually operate on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks.
Can I ask two more, or one just suggestion here real quick? From a families, from parents standpoint, it would be good at some, if we're in red, orange, here's what's going to happen. It doesn't have to be like that. I project action that we want our kids to wear masks, distance, whether that's radio, whether that's newspaper, help spread the word that the more cases of COVID-19 that appear, our kids are not going to be going to school, and that's a detriment to our community.
Absolutely. If we are able to limit community spread, then there's a greater likelihood that we will be able to open up schools safely. And so that is a crucial point. If the CDC recommendations, our county recommendations are wear a mask, keep socially distanced, stay at home if you can. If we're all able to follow those guidelines and community spread is limited, it drastically increases the chances that we will be able to reopen our schools for face-to-face instruction. And, I think that's crucial. If we can all chip in and help each other out, then we'll all derive the benefits of that across our community.
Yeah, so Dr. Engel, I got a question. I was wondering, do you know how do I say this? Do you know what the county is using as guidelines or like certain measuring tools to measure like how we're going to open school? Like are they using like national kind of statistics, local statistics, state statistics, or like what are they using?
It's my understanding that they're using local statistics. So in our community, they're keeping track of those both in La Crosse County and then across the region in general. And I believe the county compass kind of dives into some of those metrics, and it talks about under the epidemiology, what the spread looks like in our community at this time. It looks at the local hospital capacity, and then it also looks at local contact tracing abilities. And so I think those are the three general categories, and it looks at local things relative just to our community. So La Crosse County is what they're looking at, which is, the 5 school districts here.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. And I think that you all might have mentioned some stuff about this, but I just kind of want to dive a little deeper. In terms of our virtual academy, but then also thinking about the communication to parents, specifically our racially diverse parents. Are we sending things out, in different languages to make sure that the parents fully understand what's happening with all the decisions that's being made? So I'm thinking like our Hmong families, our Spanish-speaking families, and so on and so forth. Like, have we reached out in various culturally responsive ways to ensure that those parents really, those families, I should say, those families truly understand what's going on and where the school district is headed?
We have engaged our translators to translate our documents into other languages so that they're more accessible to families. I think as we get to more detailed plans, your point is well taken in the culturally responsive ways. And so we'll need to engage our cultural liaisons and maybe other leaders in those communities in order to ensure that the information gets disseminated in ways that's accessible beyond just language barriers. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
And then a little bit too. Oh, sorry, Shana, were you still going?
You got it. I think we're probably going to ask the same question.
Okay. Yeah. So to kind of piggyback off that, I think earlier when you said that 60% of the respondents said that they did want to go to school, do you know what percentage of people of the 60%? So like what percentage of the actual La Crosse school district replied back to that? And also because conversations with a lot of Hmong families, they didn't really know like what was going on. They didn't really know if school was opening back up. They didn't really know any of the kind of details. And so like how do they receive that information to know like what's happening with the schools, whether they want to go back to school or whether they want to go online? Those were received, and what percentage of people actually replied back to wanting to go back to school or going online?
Yeah, we had 2 points of data. The first was when we were considering reopening for year-round school, our principals and administrative assistants called all of the families at Northside and Hamilton. And so there was a voice communication there. And that survey, so to speak, indicated that 80% of those families were interested in returning face-to-face at that time. The second point of data that we gathered was a survey regarding interest in the Cooley Region Virtual Academy. And that was before a lot of information was available. However, we had 1,500 respondents, about a quarter of our population, and it indicated 10% were definitely interested in Cooley Region Virtual Academy, and about another 20 or 30% had more questions that they wanted asked, which left about 60% that were solely interested in face-to-face at that time with the information available.
And do you all have the demographic breakdown of that? No.
Unfortunately, we don't for the Cooley Region Virtual Academy.
Okay. My final question was around the virtual academy. thinking about our ELL populations. I'm assuming that I'm making an assumption, but just, for the public to know and recognize, when we do our virtual academies, that specific population, in terms of our online resources, we will be having, our resources will be in multiple languages for those students, correct? Or family members that need those, those language resources is what I'm really getting at.
I'm not entirely sure about some of those accessibility concerns at this time, and I can certainly get back to you on that. I do know that it's our obligation, regardless, to provide supports to families for any program that we provide. So we would provide EL support for our English learners for those programs. Okay.
And that accessibility piece also brought out that after our last meeting, the conversation around the plans for special education and things like that as well. I just want to make sure that we be very intentional about doing some specific updates on that too, for families to hear if they're watching via online or whatever, because I think that's another population that can definitely, we raise our anxiety with in terms of when we have these conversations of what it looks like to come back to campus. I mean, sorry, I work at Western. To come back.
Very conscious of that, that need for our students with special, that are in special education. And we're thinking through all the myriad needs, whether it's speech, OT, learning disabilities, physical therapy, our students with intellectual disabilities. There's a vast range of needs, and the supports that we need to provide need to be commensurate with their IEP and also need to be appropriate given their mode of learning. So that's very top of mind.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spivey. Are there any final questions or comments this evening? My understanding is Dr. Engel will be giving, we'll have this on our agenda moving forward. So at each meeting, there will be an opportunity as well, just so the board members know. But any further questions or comments tonight? Okay, then we're going to move to the next item on our agenda. Announcements by Ms. Como.
Well, normally we don't have a meeting in July for CISA 4, but we had a special meeting for the transition to Keel Arneson. He's the new director of CISA 4. We went over his transition plan, and we also decided what auditor engagement letter to accept, pricing and all that kind of good stuff. And next month, August 5th, is the annual convention and organizational meeting, because districts kind of rotate through whether or not they have a seat on the board, and they get voted back on. La Crosse always has a seat on the board, so I will remain in CISA 4. And that would be it.
Thank you, Ms. Como. Next up, we have announcements by Mr. Korberg.
The only thing I have regarding the foundation is the golf challenge or fundraiser is still on. It's the Labor Day weekend, the Saturday. There probably will be some differences in the way teams are put out onto the course. But if you're at all interested, please sign up. They also are looking for gift cards and any kind of incentive, because the prizes are going to be a little different this year as well. So foundation is still working on those kinds of issues, and hopefully it'll turn out to be, because it's the main fundraiser, so hopefully it will be a success.
Thank you, Mr. Korberg. The only announcement that I have is this Friday is the Wisconsin Public Education Network's Summer Summit. If you recall, last year it was here in La Crosse, the first time it had been held in Western Wisconsin. This year, as you might imagine, it's going to be all virtual. Our school district is a partner with the Wisconsin Public Education Network. I know we've got some teachers that are going to be presenting on Friday I'm going to be on a panel on school board advocacy. But so if you have some availability, that's happening this Friday. And now announcements from Dr. Engel, if you have any.
I have none at this time.
Are there any other announcements by board members?
Lori, can I just want to, I spoke about the school reopening, but I just want to thank Dr. Engel and the whole staff. I know this is a crazy time and you guys are working overdrive on this, and hopefully we get, hopefully we can have a great school year. But so thank you, everybody in the district, the teachers that are dealing with the anxiety. Means a lot for our kids. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. All right, next up we have agenda planning.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the August 3rd, 2020 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Mr. Spivey to approve the August 3rd, 2020 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections. We'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Meyer?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. All right, next up we have our board debriefing. And I'm thinking about Mr. Jimenez comments that he shared after the last professional development on coherent governance around board debriefing. So I just wanted to let board members know that you'll be receiving an email, I think shortly, with a poll Laura and I talked about for some professional development around coherent governance with Randy and Linda again in August. Any other comments on the board debriefing this evening?
The only thing I'd like to add is that once we are looking at I know we don't know what's going to happen with school, but if our students are going back to school, then we definitely need to be meeting in face-to-face too, as far as a board. I think we need to follow the guidelines and look at what the COVID guidelines are for the Cooley Compass. But definitely, I think we need to be kind of setting a mark that we need to try to get back in meeting face-to-face as well, especially if our students are going to be.
I agree to that. I've heard people say that, so.
Thank you, Mr. Korberg. Thank you, Ms. Como. Any other comments? Thank you, board.
Hey, I'm sorry. I got one more. What did we do in terms of? Did we not just say we were going to invite the student reps to our virtual meetings, or how is that working?
So the student reps right now, we have student reps historically. We're actually, Mr. Turner, opening a little can of worms here, in that we're actually updating our policy right now, our bylaw on student reps, but I needed to get some additional information from Dr. Engel that was earlier. Our policy, as it currently is, indicates that school board reps meet with us over the summer, but in practice, the board has not required student reps to do that. But further, with COVID, we have one rep that's been identified at one school, but not at another at the moment. So things are a little in flux right now.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
All right. So thank you, board. Thank you, Dr. Engel. We'll adjourn for this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.